Welcome to the Rewind Time podcast, where we have conversations about all things history, even with people from the past. This is episode 6, The History of Coffee. Enjoy.
Okay, so coffee. I mean, who doesn't love a good cup, right?
It's true. It's pretty universal.
Yeah. But have you ever thought about, all the history behind it?
You mean more than just, it wakes you up in the morning.
Exactly. Coffee's had this crazy impact on, well, everything.
Yeah.
Wars, revolutions, even, how we work.
It really has. And honestly, it's a lot more interesting than most people realize.
That's what we're going to do today, a deep dive into how coffee, kind of changed the world.
Should be fun.
We've got a History.com article, and then 2 pieces from EV Magazine.
Nice. A lot of good stuff to work with there.
Seriously. Okay, so way back, Ethiopia. You've heard that story about the goat herder culty, right?
Oh, yeah, the one where the goats start acting all crazy after eating these berries. I think one of the EV Magazine articles talks about that.
Right. And then he's like, maybe I should try these things.
And bam, coffee is born.
Pretty much. But it wasn't just some random energy boost, was it?
No, not at all. It's actually tied to religion and rituals early on.
Really?
Yeah. That History.com piece talks about how Sufi monks used it to stay awake during prayers.
Wow, I never knew that.
Yeah. So right from the start, you've got this connection to, spirituality.
It's interesting because that kind of sets the stage for coffee becoming this big social thing.
Totally. You can almost imagine those monks sharing coffee and talking about, big ideas.
And then, bam, you have coffee houses.
Which were huge in so many cultures. Not just a place to get a drink, but, the center of everything social and intellectual.
Yeah.
Especially in the Ottoman Empire.
The EV Magazine articles go into that, right? How in the Ottoman Empire, coffee houses were the place to hang out.
Yep. Alcohol was forbidden there, so coffee houses were kind of the third space. Not home, not work, but this whole other world.
Which is different from Europe, right? Where you had all the taverns and pubs.
Totally different scene. And it shows you how, coffee really fit into each culture in its own way.
Okay, but we can't forget the rebellious side of coffee, right?
Coffee and revolution. Oh, yeah, they go hand in hand.
I mean, how many times have we seen that image? Revolutionaries plotting over coffee.
Right. And it's not just a stereotype. Coffee houses were, the hotbeds of dissent. Both Evie and that History.com article mention it.
It's in that article about the governor of Mecca trying to ban coffee in, the 1500s.
1511, I think it was.
Right, because people were criticizing him in the coffee houses.
Dude was not happy.
And, of course, there's the American Revolution. Those colonists love their coffee.
Oh, yeah, totally. I mean, think about the Green Dragon Tavern in Boston, plotting the Boston Tea Party fueled by coffee.
It's crazy to think about all the historical events that, were kind of brewed up over coffee.
And it makes sense, right? It gives you that energy, it gets you thinking, gets you talking.
Speaking of energy, we have to talk about how coffee played a huge role in, the Industrial Revolution.
It's kind of ironic, isn't it?
Coffee, the drink of revolutionaries, also fueled capitalism and the 9-to-5 grind.
Totally. Evie Magazine actually has this really funny anecdote about King Frederick of Prussia in the 1700s.
He was the one who was obsessed with beer, right?
Yeah, totally. And he actually tried to ban coffee. He wanted everyone to drink beer instead.
That's hilarious.
Right. But as much as he loved beer, coffee was just taking over. It was becoming the fuel of the Industrial Revolution. People were shifting from farms to factories.
And those factories needed everyone to be alert and focused, right?
Exactly. They needed that caffeine boost. And it was this whole shift to clock time, which EV Magazine talks about.
Talk time.
Yeah, structuring the workday around the clock, not just sunrise and sunset. It was a whole new way of life, and coffee helped people adapt to it.
So coffee was basically helping to, run those factories and build this whole new way of working.
It's pretty amazing the impact it had.
Yeah, but it's not all sunshine and productivity, right? There's a much darker side to this story.
Oh, absolutely. When you start talking about coffee as a global commodity, that's where things get complicated.
The History.com article talks about how coffee production relied heavily on slavery, especially in Brazil.
Yeah, and that's a part of coffee's history that unfortunately can't be ignored. It had a really huge impact on the world, and it's important to acknowledge that.
Totally. And it's not like those problems just disappeared when slavery was abolished.
Right. It's way more complicated than that.
The History.com article also talks about how coffee production was tied to a lot of violent conflict in Latin America in the 20th century.
In Guatemala in 1954, They had a democratically elected government that was trying to, like, redistribute land used for coffee production to farmers.
And the U.S. got involved, right?
Yeah, it was a whole U.S.-backed coup that overthrew the government, all because of, well, coffee, in a way.
It's kind of unsettling, honestly, like how something as simple as coffee can be tied to such huge, dramatic events.
It shows you how interconnected everything is, right?
Wow.
And how important it is to understand the full story behind, well, behind everything, really. Especially something we consume every day, like coffee.
And that History.com article really made me think about how, like, those power dynamics, those problems, they didn't just vanish.
No, not at all. They still affect the coffee industry today in a lot of ways.
Okay, but let's shift gears for a minute. Talk about something a bit more, upbeat, like instant coffee.
Instant coffee. The History.com article calls it the Cup of George.
Cup of George.
Yeah, it was named after George Washington, an American inventor. He figured out how to, like, mass produce instant coffee.
Wait, really? That George Washington?
No, haha, different guy. But it took off during World War I.
Makes sense. Soldiers in the trenches probably didn't have time for, like, a fancy pour-over.
Exactly. They needed caffeine and they needed it fast. Instant coffee was perfect for that.
And then those soldiers came home, and they still wanted their instant coffee.
Exactly. It helped make instant coffee popular with everyone, not just the military.
So World War I, it changed the world in, like, so many ways, but it also changed how we drank coffee.
You could say that. And this whole idea of convenience, of wanting things fast and easy, well, that set the stage for the next big thing in coffee. Starbucks.
Okay, Starbucks. Hard to imagine life without it now, right?
It's everywhere. But yeah, it wasn't always this giant thing. The History.com article talks about how Howard Schultz, the founder, he had this vision.
I remember hearing about that. He went to Italy and was like, whoa, their coffee culture is amazing.
Right. He wanted to bring that to America, this idea of a third space, like a place to hang out, socialize, and of course, drink really good coffee.
And it wasn't just about the coffee itself. It was the whole atmosphere, right? The comfy chairs, the music, the Wi-Fi.
Exactly. Starbucks created this whole experience. You know, it became more than just grabbing a cup of joe. It was like a lifestyle.
And they totally nailed it. They didn't just make espresso drinks popular. They made coffee this social experience, this, like, status symbol.
It's pretty crazy how much they changed things. And it's interesting, right? Because in a way, Starbucks brought coffee back to its roots.
You mean, like, back to those early coffee houses we've talked about? The ones that were all about social interaction and ideas.
Exactly. They created this modern version of that. From the Ottoman Empire to, well, your local Starbucks, it's all about community and connection.
But it's not just about giant corporations like Starbucks, is it?
No, definitely not. There's this whole other movement happening all about quality and sustainability.
Like those independent coffee shops that are popping up everywhere.
Exactly. They're roasting their own beans, focusing on ethical sourcing, really appreciating the craft of coffee.
It's almost like a counter movement to the mass-produced coffee that Starbucks represents.
I think you're right. It's about slowing down, enjoying the flavor, knowing where your coffee came from.
It's cool how coffee can be both things, right? Like, it can be fast and convenient, but it can also be this slow, almost meditative experience.
It really speaks to how versatile it is. It fits into any culture, any lifestyle, There's a coffee for everyone.
But I also think there's this deeper thing going on. It's like people are rediscovering the soul of coffee, that social aspect that's always been there.
I think you're onto something. Even in our crazy busy world, we still need connection. We need community. And coffee shops, whether they're fancy or just a local place, they give us that.
Okay, so big question. What's next for coffee?
That's a good one. We're at this interesting point, right? You've got the big companies like Starbucks, and then you've got this whole artisanal coffee scene.
And they're both growing in their own ways.
It'll be interesting to see how it all plays out. Who knows what the future of coffee looks like?
Only time will tell.
And speaking of time, remember those EV magazine articles? The ones about coffee and politics?
Oh, yeah, those were wild.
Yeah.
Like that Ottoman governor trying to ban coffee because people were talking trash about him in the coffee houses.
It's crazy, right? Coffee was like this symbol of free speech, of resistance. And it wasn't just in the Ottoman Empire. It was happening all over Europe during the Enlightenment. Coffee houses were where intellectuals and revolutionaries hung out.
So coffee, it didn't just wake people up. It woke up their minds. It made them think. Made them question things.
Exactly. It's like coffee has this power to, like, stimulate not just our bodies, but our minds and, like, our whole society.
So maybe the real question is, what role will coffee play in shaping the world in the future?
Will it still be this force for change, or will it become, I don't know, too commercialized?
Maybe that's something to think about while we're sipping our next latte.
Absolutely. Coffee's got a long and complicated history, and it's still being written.